you. Thank you. Well, I would like to start with Article 2, Section 4, which states the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Oftentimes, it's a fine line that the President must walk to ensure they uphold the values of the Constitution, not only to appease the citizens of the country, but also to ensure they remain in power. This helps defend our nation against extreme and sudden implementations by the President. However, these checks also make it more difficult for great and progressive actions to be taken. Due to the difficulty of passing legislation, the President may pass what is called an executive order, which requires no consent from Congress in order to manage the duties of the federal government. So far, every president we have ever had, with the exception of William Harrison, has used at least one executive order, some a lot more than others. These executive orders don't allow for a president to sidestep any checks and balances, but they do allow for them to take any steps within the scope of power of the constitutional authority of the executive branch. The most famous example of an executive order would likely be considered the Emancipation Proclamation, enacted by Lincoln in 1863, which declared the freedom of over 3 million slaves in the Confederacy. The premise of democracy is established with 6 democratic ideals, including popular sovereignty, separation of powers, judicial review, limited government, checks and balances, and lastly, federalism. Several U.S. presidents are responsible for enforcing these ideals we have today, the most significant being Abraham Lincoln, in our opinion. Lincoln was responsible for issuing the Emancipation Proclamation during the Civil War, freeing all slaves and establishing their basic rights nationwide for the first time in American history. However, Lincoln's every move was not in support of our nation's democratic ideals, despite popular belief. He was responsible for the suspension of habeas corpus, which allowed the government to detain individuals without any sort of trial or hearing. This goes against the right to fair trial that is given and is essentially an unconstitutional. Written in the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson asserts to the King of England that there are certain rights, ones that he declared to be inalienable, that we are granted at birth simply because we are human. These rights include the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but are later expanded upon by our very own Constitution. Amongst these are the freedom of expression, the right to fair trial, the right against unreasonable search and seizure, and the right to bear arms.
Alexander Hamilton explains in Federalist 70 that the ingredients which constitute energy in the executive are unity, duration, an adequate provision for its support, and competent powers. Essentially, the president must have enough power to take action, but the power must be within its limits, and it must always be in a manner that supports the people's rights and acts in their benefits. He wrote this in support of the ideal of limited government, which is the idea that protects our people's rights and liberties and prevents the government from infringing upon them. Throughout our nation's history, we have made great progress to protect the liberties of our citizens that we boast so proudly about. President Lyndon B. Johnson is a great example of progressivism at the hands of the president. LBJ did an amazing job of protecting the rights of citizens if we ignore what happened in Vietnam, passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and subsequently outlining discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. As stated in the Presidential Powers II Crash Course Government and Politics number 12, the president has limited legislative power, but he can attempt to set a legislative agenda by recommending laws. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, originally proposed by President Kennedy, was championed and pushed through Congress by President Lyndon B. Johnson after Kennedy's assassination. Unfortunately, however, we face a presidential administration that has many worried for their rights. As the second Trump administration gets underway, majorities of the LGBTQ+ community say they are worried for themselves and their friends and allies. According to a new Pew Research Center survey, 78% of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer adults in the United States say they expect the administration's policies to have a negative impact on people who are transgender. And 71% expect a negative impact on those who are gay, lesbian, or bisexual. As a nation who has made so much progress in tackling adversity for those that face the most discrimination, to many it feels as though we are reverting and reversing our progress. We also face an even more worrying prospect. Donald Trump, although claiming his opposition to it, has elected cabinet members who have given their support for a political movement titled Project 2025. This roadmap has not even hinted at, but outright threatened to remove several rights from some of our most marginalized groups. Although it has not been enacted yet, Project 2025, if it becomes a goal of our president, may be one of the greatest infringements upon some of the rights promised to us by our Constitution. It is this nation's pride how well we have fought to protect our citizens' liberties, and it is the hope of our citizens that all of our presidents may continue to uphold this value.